was not but a month ago when ignorance swam through the air and joy was a common word. I had just moved into an apartment complex on the outskirts of a small town of Arrowbank. It was a nice enough place. It was a fine mix of nature and civilization. Truly a perfect living place for a girl like me. I had the movers carry my few items up the dizzying staircase to the top floor, which had become the location of my home. That night, I unpacked my slight gear, a series of books on evolution and genetics, my notebooks containing various experiments and notes, and finally, a gag, a present I received from my friends as a going away gift. A book on the supernatural. The room was quaint, not much in the way of fancy, but livable. There was no real issue, besides its location, that is. Days after I settled into my new home, a weird string of articles on bizarre deaths appeared on the news. In the outskirts of Arrowbrook, in the deep Arrowbrook forests, 5 people were found dead and butchered. All of the victims were found stuffed, turned into life-size dolls by some twisted, depraved being. The doll maker murders was what the newscaster dubbed them. And before they knew it, rumours of a more supernatural force behind the murders rose. Witchcraft, some claimed. Vengeful spirits, claimed others. Most agreed that no mere mortal could forge such a nightmare scene. Most, except for me, that is. I was sceptical from the start. I was a woman of science who had better things to do than worry about some stupid man with a depraved doll fetish. Or so I thought. When the rumours spread to me, I thought nothing of them, other than the false claims created from paranoia and fear. I used all my knowledge of anatomy and psychology to prove how this could be done, and how disturbed you would have to be to do it. However, in most of my cases, I fell flat. There always seemed to be something that stuck me. Whether it was the fact that the victims had no previous records of existing, or that they found no trace of the doll maker at the scene. I was convinced that these murders were nothing but hysteria, and that there must be some evidence to the victims' identities and the identity of the doll maker. That was when I set off on search for this fabled being, spending 3 days hopelessly wandering through the Arrowbrook woods, looking for the pitiful shack that many considered Ed Gein's summer home. Halfway through the first day, I realised I had no real clue on the location of the dollmaker's domain, and I only knew vague directions through rumours, and from what I read in the articles. The only directions I could gather was that the shack laid about 12 miles out from my home, deep in the forest. The second day was better. I was able to find a clear path, a path I speculated was made by the police. Well, by their vehicles. News crew vehicles and ambulances can forge a lovely path in these types of situations. I spent most of the day travelling the ways, but something strange happened at about 6 p.m. I heard a screech. It was faint and distant, but it was blurred curdling. My head swam with images of murder and human taxidermy, of a man sewing a fellow human being's mouth closed. I quickly dispelled the thought, for I was a woman of science, not superstition. The third day was when things truly took a turn for the worse. I was near the shack. I could feel it, deep within me. I could finally dispel all those dreaded, nasty rumours that had spammed my ears for weeks. With glee, I sprinted through the path of overgrown and pressed down mosses and broken tree branches until I reached a cloaked figure standing in the path. Who it was, I had no clue. I could barely even tell its gender. Its skin was as pale as moonlight, and its face was obscured beyond recognition. It wore a black dress, although it had no sign of a figure. The thing just stood there. I stared at it, and I could feel that it was staring at me. Time stopped, and fear truly began to sink in. However, I stood my ground, staring down the thing, calmly. It seemed to just turn around and walk away. I just stood there, staring into the same place as before, staring into space and nothing, reconciling what I just saw. My first thought was that it was the doll maker, but I quickly dispelled these thoughts and simply thought her to be a foreign woman who was exploring the Arrowbrook woods. Then it occurred to me, why would a woman in a morning gown be in the centre of a forest? And why couldn't I make out what her face looked like? I shrugged the thoughts away and continued my venture. Later that night, around midnight, my scepticism was shattered. I reached the shack that I believed was the home of the doll maker, and I made my way inside. It was quite easy, seeing how there was no door, and not much in the way of glass in the windows. I carefully stepped in, looking to my left and to my right. I still had a great amount of doubt with me on the existence of the doll maker, but after a while, even the rumours become possible to a mind like mine. The room was dull, empty, decaying. Mould was plastered to the walls, as if it had always been there. I wandered further, still into the room, my gaze locked in constant search for some sign of life. When I reached the centre of the room, I noticed a staircase leading down into a pitch-black pit. Cautiously, I plunged myself into the deep abyss. The room I'd found myself in was dark, eerie, and the darkness plunged everything into obscurity. The darkness pressed against my skin, as if it was trying to become me. I shrugged it off, rapidly rubbing my hands against my arms. The temperature was bizarre. It seemed to have been so much colder than the poor, pitiful shack above. The room, while obscured, still was visibly complex, large. Strange structures of cloth, metal, and unidentifiable substances that could only be described as the hides of some large animal. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a flashlight. Oh, how I wish now that I'd forgot that infernal torch. If I had, I would have died peacefully, instead of having to witness the horrific events yet to be told. I shone my light on the wall to reveal grotesque masks and human-shaped figures, each one a victim of the doll maker. I started to shake as I stared in horror at the dolls. I couldn't move. I dropped my flashlight and spun back to the staircase, only to realise it had vanished. The horror sunk in quicker as my light began to fade. The drop had done a toll on the light. Unfortunately for me, it was my only source of light, and I was about to plunge into the darkness. Now my superstition had been demolished, and now I was a firm believer in the doll maker, and shades, and evil. That was the first time ever I broke into tears and prayed. I prayed for my safety. I prayed for this to just be a dream. I wanted this to just be a hallucination. It was when an unearthly chill was sent down my spine that I knew that praying was not going to help me here. I looked up, shivering, cold and afraid, to see a tall being standing before me, face obscured, dressed in black, and flesh as pale as moonlight. I fell backwards, crawling back as the figure approached. It mumbled words of languages that no human knew, and held its hand out, as if it was telling me to not be afraid of my fate. For a second, I wanted to take its hand and accept my fate, however, I did not. I stood up, legs weak and trembling, and I screamed. I was not afraid of it. I told it that. It had no power over me. Time stood still. Me and it were locked in a staring contest. I thought for a second I was free. I was so wrong. The creature did not kill me. No, that punishment would be too lenient. Instead, I witnessed the dollmaker doing its horrible deeds that I cannot recount in this article. The scene was beyond graphic, heck, beyond shocking and beyond disturbing. The next thing I remember, I was in a hospital bed, being held down by several people, screaming. The dollmaker, it's real. You must believe me. I'm not going insane. Get your fucking hands off me. I'm not insane. I was told I imagined the entire thing. I was told that there was no dollmaker. But now I believe the dollmaker is fact. How do I know? How do I know that? And how do I know that I'm not insane when I was deemed cured? I returned home to find a life-size doll sitting in my bedroom.